Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Friday Night Live. Sorry, I was 3 minutes late tonight. I was trying to set some things up. I've I've had quite a few questions this week, more than I can probably cover off. So what I'm going to do is I've changed the order a bit. If I get round to all of them, all well and good. If I don't, um, I might leave some of them. Some of them are things that I've covered off quite a few times in various other lives. And there's some stuff that I've not covered off before, which I thought was quite interesting. So I thought, as I say, I'll kind of put them in an order. So hopefully make it a bit more interesting. So let's make a start. The first one of which, my 13-year-old was learning about alcohol at school recently. Yet the only thing to be passed on to the class was that you could buy alcohol at 18 years old, buy for 16 and 17-year-olds to consume with a meal. So basically what the law is. What would be the key facts you think should be included to be taught to 13-year-olds regarding alcohol and its dangers? So I've got two sons, 8 and 10, and the 10-year-old recently, at the end of the summer holidays, had to do a project of his choosing, and he couldn't be bothered and wasn't really sure what to do. But we've been talking a lot about drinking and smoking and drug addiction, as you would probably expect. So we ended up doing like a little presentation. So I will share that with you now. I don't know how useful it is. He seemed to grasp the concepts fairly well. And as I say, he's 10. So hopefully it will be fairly useful for that age group. So I will talk you through it now. And let's, I hope everyone can see this all right. This is what it is. So drugs. The human brain. Our brains make drugs. Some of these you may have heard of. Adrenaline. This wakes you up and makes you feel alert. Others make you feel sleepy. Your brain releases these when it's time for bed. Things that wake us up are known as stimulants, and things that make us feel sleepy are known as sedatives. There are lots and lots of these in our brain. They all balance each other. When they are balanced, you feel good. If something happens to upset this balance, you can start to feel bad. Nicotine is a stimulant. Should probably have added that this is the main part of smoking. It contains nicotine. This means when you take it, it makes you feel awake and alert. The problem is that when your brain takes this stimulant, the problem is that when you take this stimulant, your brain realizes that the balance of chemicals in your brain has been upset. So your brain stops making its own stimulants. So when the nicotine wears off, you feel tired, dopey, and you can't concentrate. When you take more nicotine, it makes you feel much better, but only by making you feel as good as you did before you took it in the first place. Alcohol is the opposite to a stimulant. It makes you feel tired and relaxed. Again, your brain realizes the balance has been upset, so it releases more stimulants to wake you up. So when the alcohol wears off, you feel a bit nervous. You also find it very hard to sleep. When people drink alcohol, they often wake up in the night and can't get back to sleep. This is why adults are tired the day after they have been drinking. Both alcohol and nicotine speed up our heart rate. Nicotine speeds up our heart rate because this is a stimulant. Alcohol speeds up our heart rate because our brain releases stimulants when we drink it. When our heart rate speeds up, we want to sit down and rest. So both drinking and smoking makes us feel lazy and stops us from enjoying exercise. Addiction is when we can't stop doing something even if we want to. Because when the drugs wear off, we feel bad, and when we feel good when we take another dose, we can become addicted to them. This is because however much we know the drugs are bad for us, we need them to feel good. Addiction is like being very hungry for something, but instead of being hungry for food, which is good for us, the hunger is for a poison. As I say, I don't know how useful that is, but that's what I came up with. So as I say, I'm not sure if it's useful or not. Hopefully it is. If anyone wants those slides, drop me an email, alcoholexplained@gmail.com. And yeah, so that was that one. So next question, sorry, because I'm screen sharing, I've got lots of different stuff on my screen at the moment. So the next one was pretty much every week you say alcohol is a sedative. So the brain becomes oversensitized to counteract the sedating effect of the alcohol. What do you actually mean when you say oversensitized? So I'm not sure if this is someone who hasn't read the book. If you go to alcoholexplained.com, the first 5 chapters are there and it's chapter 2. Okay. But what I'll do as I sorted out the screen share, I might as well do the whole lot of them. This is something I did in a talk I gave at Leeds Royal Infirmary, actually, at their alcohol liaison department. It's just a snapshot of a bit of the talk. But going back to what I spoke about just now, about how your brain works by way of homeostasis, which is a delicate chemical balance. Obviously, it's massively more complicated than what you are seeing in front of you, but it helps visualize it, I think, and it isn't actually entirely that inaccurate. So forget the numbers on the left. I just didn't work out how to remove them, frankly. Or in fact, let's say, well, I don't know, their percentages or something. This is your brain as it ought to be. The stimulants and the depressants are fairly well balanced, and this is where you feel happy and fairly buoyant and confident. When you take alcohol, which is a depressant, this happens, okay? The sedation side goes up, the depressant side goes up. Your brain seeks to counter that by doing this, pushing the stimulant side off, okay? A few hours after your last drink, usually about 5 hours, that happens. That is alcohol withdrawal. This is what I mean when I say your brain becomes oversensitized. It's trying to counter the depressant effects of the alcohol. When you are in this stage, i.e. the stimulants outweigh the depressants, you feel anxious, you feel nervous. I've said many times, it's like drinking too much caffeine, where your thoughts are jumping around and you can't concentrate or stick to anything particularly well. Okay, there's 2 ways you can get rid of this. One is to just wait, because over time you will end up back here. But actually, a far quicker way of changing things is to take another drink. Because if you take another drink, you immediately go back here. And the point here is you're balanced. So you feel a lot more confident, happy, and resilient. Okay. So that's what I mean essentially when I talk about how the brain becomes oversensitized. It's basically the brain's way of counteracting the alcohol, and it's withdrawal. It's alcohol withdrawal. Okay, withdrawal is an unpleasant feeling that is caused by a chemical imbalance that is itself caused by the original dose of the drug. Okay, that's what I'm talking about there. Alcohol withdrawal. The next question, and this is my last share. This is something I put on my Instagram today. And I found it really interesting. Hopefully you will too. So what this is, and I know I always get flack for not citing references to things. If you're interested, go on my Instagram or my personal Facebook, and I have quoted where these figures come from. But what you can see here, this is essentially consumption of alcohol and revenue created, which is obviously for the alcohol industry. Now, on the left here, you can see the population. And this is figures, I think, for England in 2014 or 15 or something. So you can see here 16% of the population don't drink, 59% are moderate drinkers, 21% are hazardous drinkers, and 4% are harmful drinkers. I don't know I haven't been back to the actual study itself and looked at how they classify moderate drinkers or harmful drinkers or whatever. That's not really the point of this. The point is these next 2 bars, and in particular the last one. But let's look at consumption. So as you can see on the left here, that's the breakdown of the population. But here you can see the people that are consuming all the alcohol. So although 60% of the population is supposedly a moderate drinker, they only consume 23% of the alcohol. And that's as you'd expect, because obviously the more you're drinking, the higher a percentage you're going to get. But what's really fascinating is this column here, which is revenue. So this is money the alcohol industry makes. And as you can see, what's that, 60, nearly 70% of their income comes from people drinking harmful or hazardous amounts of alcohol. Now, the reason I'm showing you this is because the question I got asked was, loved your post today about the revenue provided by customers drinking at a harmful level, but I'm going to have to take a while to process it. How are we meant to feel about manufacturers and purveyors of alcohol in the light of this information? I mean, it's kind of an open secret anyway, and makes absolutely sense that those imbibing at an unhealthy level provide the largest proportion of sales to the industry. But this independent research constitutes proof. This knowledge is now out there, and combined with our understanding of how alcohol is addictive, changing things significantly. The manufacturers and the government cannot deny what's happening, that they are facilitating and profiting from the addiction of the population to alcohol, or the sale of an addictive substance, if you like. I mean, at least the petrochemical companies provide a service, albeit simultaneously blocking greener alternatives. This new information would indicate that the manufacturers and retailers of alcohol are profiting from harm and, as your book so clearly reveals, provides no unique benefits at all. The alcohol lobby should have a lot of concerns as a result. I think that is all extremely good points, but I think the problem is we are, and to be honest, I didn't really put that out there to make people start throwing stones at the alcohol industry. It was just, I just found it quite interesting. And I hadn't posted anything to Instagram for a few days, so I thought I'd put that on there. But I think the point is, what the alcohol industry will say is, yes, but it's a legal substance and we're allowed to sell it, which is a hard argument to kind of to push back on, isn't it? Because it is legal. And if you think about the tobacco industry is thriving. It's doing extremely well. British American Tobacco, headquartered in London, it's providing, God knows what its revenue is. It's huge. They are selling something that, like alcohol, is addictive and kills people. But we're at a point where most of society accepts that nicotine and smoking is addictive and kills people, and yet they still carry on. So I think where we end up is like, well, how are these substances still legal? But the problem there is we start getting into whole different arguments about, well, how would you even begin to make it illegal anyway? Because to make a law, you've got to have the resources to enforce that. And banning smoking or drinking isn't going to stop people from drinking or smoking. They will just do, prohibition was a clear kind of example. People want to do it and they will carry on doing it. So if you make it illegal, you don't necessarily stop the harm. In fact, you may increase it, because suddenly you would open the gates for, illegal distilleries, which are probably going to cause more harm than, what they produce is probably going to be even more poisonous than what the supposedly respectable alcohol industry creates. So it's, as I say, it wasn't necessarily put out there just to get people to start throwing stones at the alcohol industry. It was just, I thought, quite an interesting thing, and it kind of it does make a mockery of that drink responsibly. When they put drink responsibly, it's not. It goes against the entire point of addiction, doesn't it? If you're addicted to something, you're not doing it sensibly. You're being forced to do it against your better judgment. So yeah, I don't think there is an easy answer to that. They're selling a legal product. I kind of feel a bit out of my depth talking about that, and for me, I think it's just, I feel more comfortable with educating people and hopefully changing their perception of alcohol so that they can make an informed decision about whether they want to continue drinking or not. That informed decision being, no, of course I don't want to drink ever again, it's disgusting. So I kind of come at it the other way a bit. It's, and you quite often see as well with these arguments, people say, oh, the government will never ban it because they make loads of money out of it. Well, that's true, there's a lot of revenue on alcohol, but I'm not sure that would be the reason the government wouldn't ban it, because the government has other revenue streams. I mean, if everyone stopped drinking, there would be a deficit. The government would fill that deficit somehow, presumably by putting income tax up a bit. So I don't think it's necessarily as simple as people make out. The government won't ban it because they're making money. It's more a question of practicalities. How on earth could you ban something that 80% of the population takes? It would be extremely unpopular. virtually impossible to police. And then all the things that you saw happen in Prohibition, where criminal gangs that actually provide it suddenly become extremely powerful. General disrespect for the law generally, because most people, I think, respect most of the laws that are there. But if you start making laws that 80% of the people aren't going to obey, it kind of undermines the authority of the law anyway. So anyway, no, they're quite an interesting one, that. And I hope that was interesting for people. Yeah, as I say, I put it up there more just for interest rather than anything else. And as I say, to make a nonsense of that, please drink responsibly, that you see on bottles of alcohol. Someone's asked for my opinion of disulfiram implant, which is antabuse. And so antabuse is something that you take, and then your body becomes virtually incapable of metabolizing alcohol, so that every drink makes you feel extremely ill and unpleasant. And the implant, they actually sew it into you so that you can't decide not to take your tablet. It sounds quite brutal to me. It sounds dangerous as well. And again, it's almost like, well, what are you doing to change your view of alcohol? It's almost like going to prison for a year, isn't it? You could lock yourself away and just not let yourself take alcohol. And I always kind of think changing your perception of something so that you don't want it anymore is just a far better way of doing things. I still think there is a massive tendency in the Western world to want to take a pill to cure all ailments. And I think that's kind of a legacy of that. And unless you're going to have one of these things sewn into you for all eternity, where are you going with it? Because presumably you'll stop having it sewn in at some point. And if you start this thing thinking alcohol's enjoyable and fun and you're not going to enjoy life without it, why would that change after a year or 5 years or even 10 years of having it sewn into you? That's my problem with all of this stuff. I don't think it's actually dealing with the problem, the heart of the problem, which is believing that alcohol is an important and crucial part of your life and that you need it to cope with and enjoy life. Same as if you took a heavy drink and put them in prison for 10 years and they came out, presumably they start drinking again. And I know people say, well, it will break the habit, but I just don't really follow the logic there, because, to my mind, if I sit here and think I need a drink to relax in the evening, and then if someone said, well, I'm sewing this into you so you can't drink for 6 months, I would just think, okay, well, I'm going to be miserable for the next 6 months, but then when that ends, I'll drink again. So I really don't see how these things get to the root of the problem. I mean, that's just me. It works for some people and some people swear by it. And I know some people say they would never get over those early stages without being forced to do it. So obviously it does work for some people. So well done if it does. 19 months sober. Well done. Still not waking up early in the morning. Am I just lazy? So after 19 months, I doubt it's anything to do with alcohol. You may have a sleep problem. What I think is far more likely, and in the absence of information, I'm sort of taking a guess here, but if you are someone who drinks a lot of coffee, you will usually wake up feeling groggy, because alcohol or caffeine does a similar but opposite thing to alcohol. So most of us, we wake up in the morning, or human beings wake up and their brain floods them with stimulants so they feel awake and ready to go. Okay, if you drink coffee every morning, your brain stops doing that because it just relies on the caffeine. So what happens is when you wake up, you feel groggy and tired until you've had your cup of coffee. So if you are a coffee drinker, then you won't be waking up early in the morning. You'll just be waking up tired all the time and have to drag yourself out of bed until you have your coffee. I might be completely, and as I say, there's no information here, so I'm just taking an absolute guess that could be the problem. It won't be to do with alcohol at this stage. The other thing a lot of people don't realise, eating heavy meals before bed will disturb your sleep and leave you feeling tired. So that's something else to look at. I think I did do a blog post once on ways to address generally just sleeping. It's stuff like avoid caffeine later in the day, don't eat heavy meals, try and exercise, but earlier in the day. Exercise will help you sleep, but when you're exercising, your body kicks in with loads of oxygen and adrenaline, so it actually wakes you up. So doing it later in the day is not a particularly good idea. Um, so should they ban drinking in football stadiums? And on the other side, they wanted drinking on the stands. So I think years ago, people just drank at the football stadiums and on the stands. Then it was completely banned because of all the hooliganism in the 80s. And now you can drink in the stadiums, but you can't take alcohol actually onto the seats, which I always found a bit weird. I couldn't quite see the point of that. I suppose, I don't know, whatever the reason is. The problem is if you ban it in the stadiums, people just hammer the pubs outside, don't they? And I don't necessarily think it helps things. Yeah, I don't know. I suppose the lessons from the 80s where it does tend to lead to huge amounts of violence, but then I don't know. Don't necessarily need alcohol for that anyway. This is an interesting one. Any tips on maintaining that initial fascination and interest in learning how to become alcohol free or successfully working towards moderation? I've enjoyed this Naked Mind materials in your videos, but feel like I'm not as engaged as I was initially. I want to keep that learning going and finding new tools to stay motivated, especially going into the holiday season. I will say that I have had success over the past year, so that I'm only really drinking on the weekends. Any thoughts? Um, I don't see this as an ongoing process, to be quite honest. I don't see it as you need to be constantly working towards something. Um, for me, it's about changing how you perceive alcohol and stopping drinking, and job done. Um, and I don't know that you need to maintain interest in it. I suspect the problem here is you're talking about moderation and you're drinking at weekends. So you're constantly going to be in a state of flux. The problem with you is you still want to drink because alcohol is clearly something you perceive as enjoyable and a crux and necessary to certain parts of your life. Otherwise, you wouldn't drink it anymore. And that's the problem. So I don't think your issue is that you need to maintain interest. I think you need to re-educate yourself as to exactly what alcohol is, and start to get to grips with the fact that you don't need it, and you're only really drinking on weekends. Do you have a problem with weekends? You just like to ruin your, your weekends, spend them either hungover or comatose. And before anyone says you might just be having one or two drinks will ruin your sleep. Even one drink will ruin your sleep. So even if you're down to just one glass of wine on a Friday and Saturday night, why would you even do that? A foul tasting carcinogen that leaves you feeling slightly dulled before wearing off, leaving a corresponding feeling of anxiety, and then ruins your sleep. So you feel tired and lethargic the next day. For me, I think you need to go right back to square one, and start really re-educating yourself on what alcohol is, start to appreciate why you do not need it, and you'll be far better off without it. Can you elaborate on going on vacation alcohol free? I have one coming up and I'm uneasy about it. So holidays are a huge pleasure, okay, because you stop work, you stop all the nonsense you do every day, and you go and lie around somewhere and relax and have food cooked for you. Okay, there's nothing to not like about that. Um, the only thing that can ruin a holiday is if instead of sitting there on the beach or by the pool relaxing, you're sat there fretting over whether or not you should have something that you don't really want anyway. Because when you're doing that, when you're involved in this unpleasant internal debate or thinking about how much nicer things would be if you can have a drink, you won't be enjoying yourself. It's a simple thing of just getting to grips with the cravings, which are a conscious thought process by which you tease yourself by thinking how wonderful it would be to have a drink. So for my holidays, I sit and relax. So one of the things I love doing on holidays is sitting by the pool and reading. I don't care what anyone says, you can't do that if you're drinking, because when you're drinking alcohol, your attention starts to wander. You can't sit there and relax with your book. Okay. And then, of course, you've had one drink, and then a few minutes later, you want another one. So you can't concentrate again because you're going up to get another drink. And then, of course, you need the toilet, and then a few more, and you start to feel really tired. So for me, sitting by a pool reading a book would be ruined by drinking. It would spoil the holiday. And being on holiday and waking up at 3 in the morning, unable to get back to sleep, and then feeling really tired the next day, again, would ruin the holiday. So again, it just comes down to see it for what it really is. Don't be uneasy about it. It's going to be a wonderful experience. You're going to sit around, have food cooked for you, and just relax. It might be unpleasant in the evenings if everyone's drinking. Go to bed. You don't have to stay up late. This is one of the things people, I think, struggle with. They stop drinking and they think to themselves, well, I'll carry on as normal. So I'll sit there. Holiday entertainment is notoriously awful. And really, it's just an excuse for people to sit around and drink with a load of noise. Don't do it if you don't want to. Don't sit there and watch these idiots prancing around. Go back to your room with your book and get an early night. You don't have to do it. Ailments. Is it just me, but I seem to get every bug going at the moment? I'm almost a year free. What supplements or vitamins do you recommend to help the body recover? Again, if you're a year free, I doubt it's alcohol related. Don't forget, I mean, most of us have been in some form of lockdown for the last year and a half, going on 2 years. So we haven't come into contact with lots of other colds and coughs and all the rest of it. Apart from COVID, there's the usual flu and colds going around that we haven't come into contact with, so we haven't got immunity to. Now we're out and about again, we're going to start picking them up again. So I wouldn't worry too much. Supplements and vitamins, I personally don't take any. I have quite a healthy diet, I think, so I don't bother with them. People in the group, I think, will recommend all sorts of different things, and it might be worth putting a post in there, but I'm not, to be honest, I'm not really a supplement kind of person. I'm interested to know what the science evidence is that the brain can never unlearn that another drink is what will get rid of that anxiety, uncomfortable feeling once we have crossed that line. I'm absolutely not questioning whether you are right. I simply love to know the factual base evidence you explain. And I don't believe this is something I've heard you talk about here. I'll ask again next week if too many comments on here. You are simply the king of Quitlet, and I'm extremely grateful to you. Thank you. To be honest, I don't have any science for that. A lot of this stuff, I haven't quoted any references for it because it's stuff I've come up with. I mean, to me, a lot of it is just almost self-explanatory. I don't know how I would describe the science between not forgetting that, because for me, I wouldn't forget that. I can't think of a period of time that would pass where I would pick up a drink and have it, and when it wore off, leaving an unpleasant feeling, I would somehow not know that another drink would. Do you know what I mean? I'm not sure. Maybe I'm misreading the question. But a lot of this stuff, I mean, the biggest criticism I get for my books is that I don't quote scientific references. But really, what my books consist of is that alcohol is a sedative, a depressant, and that the brain works by way of homeostasis. That's the science, and the rest of it is just me picking it apart with common sense. So I'm not sure that there's much more to it than that, to be honest. So yeah, I'm sorry. I hope maybe I haven't answered that question particularly well, but that to me is just a lot of it's my experience. Is this what I find with it? I remember lots of times when I was younger, drinking loads during the day and then having a break and then being out in the evening and trying to drink again and not being able to. And now in my later drinking, or not now, in my later drinking years before I quit, it was the opposite. When an alcoholic drink wore off, I desperately wanted another one. And that was as simple as my brain learning that that unpleasant feeling could be got rid of by having another drink. And again, I don't have scientific studies for that. That was just my experience. And by, I suppose, the response to the books, everyone else's experience as well. Certainly no one's ever turned around and said, I don't find that. That is not my experience of it. So I think it kind of applies throughout. I'd appreciate if you can touch upon those of us who relapse like I did. I'm finding it much more difficult second time round. Is this normal? Finding it so hard to stay engaged and connected, even though I know the importance of it. So I have done a blog post on this, but I think the dynamic is, if you think back, it probably wasn't that easy the first time round. Okay. And again, I'm chancing my arm here because I don't know you and you've not put this information in. But what I usually find is people realize they've got a problem with alcohol. Most of the time people try and moderate first, and that can go on for years before they realize moderation doesn't work. And then they try and quit, and they fail, and they try and they fail, and they try and they fail, and eventually they get there. Okay, when they get there, their brain chemistry gets back to normal, so they feel a lot more resilient. They start to sleep better. Everything falls into place, and everything feels wonderful. And they start to just love the sober life. Okay, and then there's a tendency to kind of just concentrate on that good bit of it, which is absolutely fine. But then they forget how difficult it was in the first place. So a lot of people say this: I quit for an extended period and now I can't quit again. It feels more difficult this time round. I would always question, does it really feel this more difficult this time round, or was it just as difficult the first time round? Because with drinking, when you're drinking regularly, the pleasure, there's only ever two pleasures from drinking, or let's say there's three pleasures from drinking. If you're socializing, it can help the brain release endorphins, because when we socialize, the brain releases endorphins, and when your brain releases endorphins, you feel good. Okay, but to get the endorphin rush when you're socializing, you need to be relaxed and you need to be socializing. When you first arrive at a social event, you're rarely relaxed, you're a bit nervous, it takes a while to settle in, and when you settle in, you get that endorphin rush. When you go to a social event and take alcohol, by sedating the nerves, it can hurry the endorphin rush. Okay, it doesn't make you feel good. It just it quickens the onset of the endorphin rush. That's the one way that alcohol can make us feel good. The second way it can make us feel good is if we've been drinking the night before and we're still anxious and feeling unpleasant from the previous drinks due to the withdrawal or that upsetting brain chemistry, which goes back to that graph I was showed earlier. That's the second way it can make us feel good. And all it makes us feel good in that situation is by correcting the chemical imbalance that it caused in the first place. You're not really feeling good, you're just removing a bad feeling, getting back to feeling normal. The third way it can make you feel good is if you're craving. So forget being at a social occasion and forget drinking the night before. I only ever used to drink at weekends, but I'd get to a Friday night and I'd be intensely unhappy if I couldn't have a drink. Not because I had any withdrawal, but simply because all was going around in my mind was, I want a drink. I can't be happy without a drink. I really fancy a beer or a glass of wine or whatever. So instead of relaxing with a meal or with my friends or whatever it was I was supposed to be doing, I wasn't concentrating on that pleasant thing I was supposed to be doing on a Friday night. I was taken up with an unpleasant mental tantrum because I couldn't have a drink. So in that situation, it can be enjoyable. But again, all it's doing is removing a distressing mental conundrum that it caused in the first place. Okay. So they're the only three benefits we ever get from alcohol. Okay, but when you're stuck in that cycle of daily drinking, it can be very, very hard to get out of it. And what we normally need is something to just boost us out of it. I've written a new book that's going to be released, I don't know when, about smoking. It's with Annie Grace, and in there I put in a like an analogy. Imagine if you've got back pain, right? And you go to the doctor, and the doctor says to you, I've got good news and I've got bad news, right? The bad news is the back pain is cancer. The good news is it's entirely operable. We can operate on it and get rid of it completely. Now, in the interests of full disclosure, it's quite a serious operation. And when you have this operation, you will feel worse than you do now for 4 or 5 days. Okay. After that, you will feel better because the back pain will have gone. And by the way, for the last couple of years, you may have felt you were very heavy, you didn't have any energy, you were tired all the time. That was actually the cancer. So we will cut it out and remove it. You'll have 4 or 5 days where you feel worse just while you recover from the operation. And then you will feel better than you ever did ever before. Okay. There's an alternative method of dealing with it. If you don't like the idea of 5 days feeling under par, it's a packet of paracetamol. It will slightly take the edge off the cancer or that back pain. So once a day you can take these tablets and you'll feel a bit better. But of course, it will get progressively worse. you'll feel more and more tired, more and more lethargic. The pain will get worse and worse, and it will probably kill you in 5 or 10 years. Okay. What option are you going to go for? And this is the choice that's faced by drinkers all the time, because most of them realize that they will feel better when they stop drinking, but they have to go through a period of feeling worse before they get there. Okay. When you are drinking, whether you have stopped for a couple of years and gone back to it or whatever, it's very easy to keep putting off that initial dip feeling. Because if you're drinking regularly, when you stop drinking, you will find it hard to sleep for a few nights. Your anxiety will be up because of that chemical imbalance, but you won't have what you normally take to get rid of it, which incidentally also causes it and exacerbates it. So you have to go through that dip, but it's so easy when the evening comes to just think, oh, I will do it, but just not today. And you just keep putting it off and off and off. And before you know it, a year, 10 years have gone by, and that's 10 years of your life that you've just thrown away being miserable. Okay, think of it like that. It's that operation that you're putting off because you don't want to go through 4 or 5 days of feeling worse. Think of it along those lines, because when you think of it that way, it becomes so ridiculous to keep carrying on with it. Because when you drink alcohol, you're getting some very, very small relief from that tiredness and that anxiety for maybe an hour or two out of 24. And then the problem is that much worse the next day. What you need is that initial springboard. And that's why, having said anti-abuse doesn't, I'm not really on board with it, but whatever it takes to get you through those first few days so that your brain chemistry gets back to normal, you start to feel better, your confidence builds up, and everything starts to get a lot easier. It's one of the big things that alcohol withdrawal does. It makes us feel weak, mentally, just not being able to cope with things. And when we feel like that, we have a real strong urge to put off problems. When you're not feeling well, you can't face dealing with stuff. Okay. And that's kind of a catch-22 with drinking, because you need to quit, but it's hard work. And in your current state of feeling tired and anxious, you really don't want to have to do anything difficult. So you just keep putting it off and off and off. So what you really need to do is just get through those first few days, however you do it. And just stick with it. I think, again, I have done some blog posts on it. If necessary, just tell yourself you're just going to do 5 days or 10 days without alcohol. Don't even think about anything beyond that. Just grit your teeth and go through those 5 or 10 days, whatever it is. I think I said in one of the books, bearing in mind there's, wars going on out there, people freezing to death, people with arms and legs missing. You should be able to grit your teeth and go 5 or 10 days without alcohol, because when you do that, your resilience starts to build up, things start to get better, and you get back into it. It's basically finding that momentum again. And that's what you really need to get for. The last few questions I kind of struggle with a bit because they're incredibly vague. And I wonder if it's from people who haven't read the books. Tips for getting through the first month, pushing the cravings away when they come. So, as mentioned, cravings are conscious thought processes whereby you start to fantasize about how nice it would be to have a drink. So my stock answer is, don't fantasize, see the reality, look at what you're actually consuming here. It's a foul tasting carcinogen that will make you feel slightly dulled before giving you a corresponding feeling of anxiety and ruining your sleep. The only reason we believe that it is in any way pleasurable is because, one, we tend to drink on social occasions where we get that endorphin high anyway. Two, when we're drinking regularly, it's removing that anxiety, that chemical imbalance caused by the previous drinks. And three, the craving. So when you're sat there agonizing, should I, shouldn't I, or I really want one, you're not engaging and enjoying what else is going on. It's a big con, and start seeing it for what it is. The next one, could you talk about moving on in the early days? 12 for me. So well done on 12 days, but I'm not sure what I can say to that. Moving on in the early days. Talking about counting days is an interesting one. Just remember, there's not really anything about early days with stopping drinking. Stopping drinking is about learning to enjoy your life and live your life fully without alcohol. And I've said this many times before, but that is why, for me, you know, someone who has quit drinking on day one, and a week later gone on a holiday and stayed sober, and then had a birthday and gone out with friends and done all of this stuff and gone out there and really enjoyed it, despite the fact they're not drinking, it is way more sober than someone who's sat at home for 6 months, never gone out, white knuckled it, taking one day at a time, and, you know, rants and moans whenever someone puts an alcohol-free beer in a Facebook group because it's triggering them. So for me, it's not about days; it's about experiences. I don't look at stopping drinking as set amounts of time, which then mean you're getting more and more sober or better and better at it. I look at it more experiences, and I think, you know, time is fantastic because any day without alcohol is brilliant and you're learning more and more and more. But getting out there and doing those drinking situations like socializing, holidays, Christmases, whatever it is, that's why I think a year's a really good time. Because if you've done a year, you've done Christmas, Thanksgiving, barbecues with the family, nights out with friends, a birthday, holiday, whatever it might be. So you've got like a year's worth of, because we tend to live annually, don't we? We have a holiday each year, Christmas, whatever it is, a birthday. So by doing a year, you've probably done all of it. Could you do a session on social meetings without alcohol? Well, I kind of have touched on socializing. Socializing is inherently pleasurable, and when you do it, you get an endorphin rush. You start to feel really good. Alcohol doesn't actually add to it at all. I always thought I wasn't good at social occasions, and alcohol was the only thing that made it even remotely bearable. What I have subsequently learned is alcohol. I always used to have this idea that I'd have a few drinks and I'd be the life and soul of the party, and I never was anyway. So it didn't quite work out how it was supposed to. And what I've actually learned is I'm not really antisocial. I just need to be with people I like, talking about a subject that interests me. And just turns out there's not many people I like, and there's not many subjects that interest me. So that's where I was going wrong. So, you know, find your people that you fit in well with, and you'll find that you enjoy social occasions. The last question, so I did get around to them all in the end. Intrigued about the connection between drinking alcohol and shame. And again, it's incredibly vague. So I don't know if they're driving at why you do shameful things when you're drinking, or if you've done something shameful, it leads you to drink more. I'm going to go with the latter because I think it makes a bit more sense. But shame is a negative emotion, okay? So is anger, and feeling betrayed. There's lots of other things that can make us feel bad. So like mental health issues, childhood trauma, anything like that it's almost like something that hangs over us and makes us feel bad. If you are suffering from any one of those things, then a sedative, a depressant, will take the edge off it because it anesthetizes. So if you've got something unpleasant there that you feel, taking a drink will get rid of it. So yes, if you have shame or anything else making you feel unpleasant, you are more likely to be reaching for a sedative to take the edge off it. And of course, the most widely available sedative out there is alcohol. So yes, you can expect more people to drink, but the fact is, the dynamic remains. Alcohol leaves you feeling slightly dulled, but when it wears off, it leaves a corresponding feeling of anxiety. For every action, there's an equal and opposite an equal and opposite reaction. Okay, so whatever dulled effect you get from alcohol, you get an anxious effect where it wears off. So if you're feeling ashamed of something, you take a drink to get rid of it, you're just going to feel twice as bad when it wears off. So you have to keep drinking and drinking and drinking to keep dulling the shame, I guess. So yeah, I'm sorry, I may have misunderstood that. But as I say, there seemed to be like a few fairly vague questions this week that I sort of struggled with. Anyway, I hope that was useful, everyone. Have a wonderful weekend, and I shall see you next week.